Qigong and community. That's going to be the topic of this episode of Qi Life. So again, this one was a request from someone who watches the vlog, and I'm going to read their message where they requested this for a little bit of context, make sure I sort of cover what it is they wanted me to talk about. Because it was more than just, can you talk about Qigong and community? There's a particular angle here. So this is what she wrote. She put, I've been thinking about the dichotomy of Qigong. As I delve deeper into Qigong, I'm aware of how it brings people together. That's pretty cool, right? Community. Teaching, healing, therapeutics, spirituality. And yet it also seems to make me more isolated from people around me who don't have the same awareness, understanding, insights. Qigong makes me feel part of a community, but also makes me feel alone. Looking through the lens of Taiji, maybe this is an inevitable consequence of going deeper into Qigong. However, I'd love to hear your perspective on this topic. So I thought actually just within her message that there's an interesting take on things in there, in that, well, she mentions both feeling part of a community but also feeling alone, and then also the concept of Taiji. I don't have a Taiji symbol on me today, but it's probably one that you're familiar with. I've talked about it in the vlog before. The most common modern representation of Taiji is a circle, and it's got a wavy line through it, kind of an S-shaped line through it, and then one half is black, the other half is white, and then within the black there's a dot of white, and within the white there's a dot of black, and it's this circular sort of pattern. And you've seen it, it's quite a popular symbol, or it has been at times in pop culture as well. And there's some really nice and useful practical meaning within that symbol that helps us to understand this principle of Taiji. Taiji is the principle of polarity, opposites, which is a natural part of life, and their harmonious interaction. Harmonious. We'll come back to that later on. Certainly, I can empathize with what she's saying there in terms of as you get more and more into Qigong and your awareness develops, you start to look at yourself differently and the world around you differently as you understand yourself differently. You understand more about how your mind affects your body and your emotions and how this then affects your experience of life, and you just view things in a different way. And you realize that a lot of other people aren't thinking about things in the same way, and you probably didn't either in the past, but now you're seeing things in this different way, and it opens up a beautiful new perspective and understanding on yourself and on the world around you. But you can start to feel out of place with other people who are looking at things very, very differently, focusing on things in a different way. And so, yeah, there is a little bit of a polarity maybe that emerges there from, yourself, and maybe you meet others as well who are looking at things through, at the very least we can say, through the lens of energy. And part of that means, gaining this deeper, more nuanced understanding. And people who are looking at things through, well, other lenses, it might not just be one, but the lens of just physicality and so on. And so we start to, there's a polarity, there's a difference there. And and you recognize, hey, I'm looking at things in a different way, I'm viewing the world in a different way. And that can potentially make you feel a little bit lonely as part of that, when you recognize, because at the moment in the world, I think there's a growing number of people who are looking at things from this perspective of energy, but it's a relatively small percentage compared to people who are looking at things in a different way. So what can you do about that? Or how can you understand that? I mean, just accepting, hey, there's a polarity here. That's a good starting point. But what can you do to either overcome that sense of loneliness or reconcile with it in a way that you accept it and it doesn't feel like a bad thing anymore. And in a sense, maybe the loneliness goes away, or we wouldn't describe it in that way anymore. So one thing that you can do is build community. Recognize, okay, maybe this is not so common to be looking at the world and through this lens of energy and connectedness and so on. But to find other people who do view the world that way and to spend time with them so you feel like, hey, I'm not alone. There are other people, because there are lots of other people, really. It's just a smaller percentage, but there's a lot of people in the world. So, overall, there's lots of people who are looking at things that way. And there's different ways that you can find this community. So one is doing things like attending Qigong classes where you'll meet other people, and that can be online, it can also be in person, different ways, because sometimes in some parts of the world you might not find in-person Qigong classes, like it can be hard to find them. But you'll definitely at least be able to find online classes where you can communicate with different people and find that solidarity. There's a good chance you'll be able to find some in-person classes and get to know other people, spend time with them. Things like going on retreats. We can spend more time together with people who are looking at the world, looking at their life experience in a more similar way to you. Even going outside of the Qigong community into other groups of people who might be looking at life in a somewhat similar way, maybe not quite the same as exactly in some of the details as you do, with your perspective from Qigong. But again, with this broader, more nuanced view, maybe with some awareness of energy and how this plays into things. And so, the yoga community, for example, not the same. There's certainly differences in how people from a yoga community will think about things, but there's similarities. And, that you might find people there who you have commonality with. People within different healing practices and the community around them might have some similar understanding of the world, because energy is really useful in healing, and having that perspective can be very effective. And even within some spiritual groups, they might have a perspective that's somewhat similar, and you can find people and find that commonality. Similarly, if, for example, you're somewhere and there's, you can connect online with people and things like that, but you're not finding in-person classes to connect with other people, you could possibly start running some classes as a way to build that community. And it's likely you'll find that, hey, there are actually other people out there and they haven't had a way to gather together. And you're providing that for them. And that then provides support for you because you're building a community. It provides support for them. They're able to come together. That's a wonderful thing. And even if you're feeling like, ooh, actually, I don't know if I want to run a class as such, you could have a group practice where it's not so much that you're teaching, but you're facilitating people coming together to practice together and, again, form those connections, form those bonds. So that's one thing, forming community. Then another thing, though, is, well, how about your interaction with everyone else out there in the world? Now, I mentioned right early on in this vlog, when I talked about Taiji and the principle of Taiji in polarity, I talked about there being the dot of yin within yang and yang within yin, because yang is never isolated and by itself. It always has yin within it. Yin is never a completely separate thing. It always has yang within it. And they convert into one another. And recognizing this can help us in finding harmony in our interaction with other people who aren't largely sharing the same viewpoint as us. Because on some level, we will still have that commonality. One, on some level, even if we have a very, our view is very much focused on looking at things in a holistic, energy-based way, There's still going to be an aspect of physicality, of materiality within our viewpoint. There'll still be some of that. There needs to be. It's important that there is for our own well-being. And that gives us some commonality with people who their viewpoint is largely materialistic and, around physicality. We have a connection. We can communicate on that. We can interact on that. Similarly, those people who their viewpoint is largely materialistic will have within them some aspect of their perspective, of their awareness, which is around the more subtle, the energy, the holistic, the connectiveness. Now, it might not be what they're focusing on most of the time, but it will be there. Everyone has some awareness of this to greater or lesser degrees, and they put more or less focus on it. And there'll be times where this comes out more strongly for them. And you can communicate, you can connect, you can interact on that. Having this polarity and having different people with different viewpoints, different things they focus on, is a really healthy thing. It's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing, because sometimes if we focus too much on one thing ourselves, we can start to lose a little bit of context on perspective on actually what's important to have a balance within life. Because as I mentioned, even if your focus is very much on this connected, holistic viewpoint, and on energy, on some of the more subtle things, that physicality, materiality is really, really important. And if you go too far in that direction, it becomes unhealthy. And so to have other people who that's their main focus can help to pull you back into having a balance. And so when you recognize that these differences are actually really important, they're really beautiful, you can start to have a harmonious interaction. And when you need more of that counterpoint, you can choose to have more interaction with that type of person to give you balance, to give you perspective. And potentially you may find when they need some more of the counterpoint, that different view that you have, they might start to be drawn to you and interacting with you. And you can have this harmonious flow where you're both benefiting each other. People who, I'm just going to take some stereotypical examples. Someone who's an engineer or an accountant, or something like that. They're dealing with really practical, specific, engineers on a physical level, accountants on a more somewhat abstract sort of level, but really, defined, precise, very practical, black and white sort of view of things, need a more holistic, they need some balance of a more holistic perspective to give them balance so that they don't get locked within their box of their, structured thinking. And for them, having at least a little bit of, Qigong, again, it can be other things. It's not only Qigong that brings this type of perspective, is going to bring them balance and harmony. And some of those people, once they have some experience of that, will really hunger for it, crave for it, because so much of their life is built around one way of thinking. And then oh, hey, actually, this is a beautiful thing to bring balance. Similarly, vice versa, people who are involved in looking at things in, this more connected, this more subtle, nuanced way, need some of that real physicality and that materiality, that concreteness. And being able to interact with that is really beneficial for them too. So anyway, hopefully some helpful thoughts. There's real value, I guess, to sum things up, real value in building community around your commonalities, right? And so as I mentioned, that might be finding classes, doing things online, retreats, finding people in, similar, if not the same perspective as you, maybe running your own classes, things like that to bring people together. That's really valuable. So you have your own community. It's also really valuable to recognize that there can be harmony between you and people with a very different perspective. And then, using that in the most beneficial way for both of you so that you have a healthy interaction. And I think when you do that, that sense of loneliness maybe can go away and we can recognize this rich interaction we can have with everyone around us. All right, maybe a little bit of a rambly one. I don't really plan what I'm going to say in these other than to go, oh, I'll have a talk about this topic. You know, hopefully I'll have something interesting, useful to say. But maybe this has been useful for someone. I hope it has. Yeah, I look forward to seeing you on another vlog soon.